Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Virginia Cooperative Extension Plant Clinic. This is the All About Veggies series. These plant clinics are staffed or sponsored by the Virginia Cooperative Extension program of Virginia's two land-grant universities, Virginia Tech and Virginia State University. These plant clinics are staffed by Master Gardeners from Fairfax County Master Gardeners. These Master Gardeners share science-based information about gardening and horticulture topics. This evening, we'll start our clinic with Bug Watch, which will be presented by Becky Durst. Then we'll hear from Jan, who will discuss direct sowing seeds in your garden. Randy will present on ways to engage children in gardening, and Clara will discuss sensory elements you can include in your garden. These topics are all ways to involve your family in the garden so everyone can enjoy growing food for the family, no matter their age. Many of us might be disconnected from our food sources, and many kids may not realize that, carrots grow in the ground. They don't come in a bag at the grocery store. So there's also research that shows how important it is for all of us, adults and kids alike, to get outside and engage with nature. Gardening is a great way to do this. And the theme of tonight's presentation is seed time, not screen time. So we're not marketing experts, but we kind of liked how it sounded. So our first presentation is going to be from Becky, and she's going to talk about the Asian jumping worm. So Becky, could you tell us a little bit about this insect that we might see in our garden and why we might be a little concerned to see them?
Hello, I can. The Asian jumping worm is actually an invasive species of earthworm that came from Asia, and it threatens both the forest structure and lawns by consuming the soil's organic matter and disrupting the soil structure and the nutrient cycling. So unlike the classic night crawler that we see and we're very happy to see in our gardens, because the worm, they aerate the soil and the worm castings actually add nutrients and stuff back to our soils, these do the opposite. They actually degrade the soil's nutrient value and can actually ruin the entire soil structure. One of the ways we can tell the difference between a night crawler and a jumping worm is that they have a smooth, milky white collar close to the head. They thrash wildly and jump or flip over. Sometimes they even cast off the end of their tail. And their castings look like coarse coffee grounds that create a loose layer between the leaf litter and the mineral soil beneath. The life cycle of the Asian worm, or the Asian jumping worm, is an annual cycle. So in the spring, they hatch from poppy seed sized cocoons, and each cocoon, the poppy seed sized cocoon can have like 7 little worms in there. They become mature after 70 to 90 days and then can produce new cocoons. So they're extremely prolific. In the late fall, the adults die, but the cocoons overwinter and start the next generation of worms. To minimize the spread of them, you want to be careful to not buy them as bait for worm composting or for home gardens. I have a worm bin at home and I have red wigglers, and they're super fun because you put them in your hand and they kind of wiggle all around. But when you look at them, they don't have that milky white collar. You can see that there's a difference. You want to check your new mulch, compost and soil for signs of jumping worms. And then also check the soil and roots of potted plants and trees for jumping worms or their castings before you plant them in your yard. So just be sure to get in there and kind of work into that soil and to see if you notice anything that looks suspicious. A way that you can try to detect them in your existing garden is to use a mustard mixture, which I found this fascinating. So you mix 1 gallon of water with a 1/3 cup of ground yellow mustard seed, and you pour it slowly into the soil. The worms will come to the surface. It doesn't kill the worms, it just brings them to the surface. And then you can see just by the milky collar or by the behavior if you have any jumping worms present. If you do find them, you should go to imapinvasives.org to report your sightings, or also report them to your local Cooperative Extension office. And that would be to our Cooperative Extension agent, Adria, and her email is at the end of this presentation. I am going to actually put a link to a fantastic spreadsheet in our chat box for everyone to have and learn a little bit more about the jumping worms. Back to you, Caitlin.
Thanks, Becky. That is really great information, and I especially like the mustard trick. That's something that I don't think any of us would have even begun to think about on our own. So our next presenter is Jan, who's here to give an overview of direct sowing seeds in the garden. This is a nice and interactive way to involve kids in gardening. It's fun to grow these things, and kids will enjoy, being able to, get their hands in the dirt and then see a reward in pretty short order for their work. So Jan, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, hi there. As Nathan said, I am giving a presentation here on direct sowing seeds, specifically talking about lettuce, carrots, radishes, and beets. And yes, those are radishes from my own garden from last year. Now, when we're talking, there's a whole bunch of vocabulary words right there. And in this slide, we see that there's one group here at the top in that multicolor green and orange striped box that says, the top says direct sow and the bottom says transplant. And direct sow means that you are going to put the seeds directly into soil and leave them there. And you expect it to grow right there in that soil, in wherever that soil is. If that soil is in your yard, or if that soil is in a pot, you're not going to move them after you put the seed in there. Now, the ones at the bottom, it has the word transplant next to it, which means you would start with a plant that's already, maybe 3 inches tall, maybe 6 inches tall in a pot, and you would be planting the pot into your soil or to a bigger pot. So when you look right now here in Fairfax County, we are in, for the most part, zone 7. If you look in those columns there under zone 7, you'll see, yes, it has listed beets, a bunch of different types of lettuce. Chard, collards, and kale are also lettuce. And there's also, let's see, one of the charts actually has radishes. So we'll just assume that radishes is in there, okay? But the reason we are talking about these to sow them directly into the ground is that it's time to plant them now in May. And how do we know that? Besides that table showed us. There is a document, and there's the internet site where you can find that document that lists a whole lot of the different types of vegetable crops down one side, and then it gives you dates across the top for the last frost of the year. It's about average of the last frost, and then the first frost in the fall. And if you can see this chart, hopefully you can see what those little boxes are filled in with. The X's say that those are the weeks that you're supposed to plant. So if you run your finger down the left column and it says beets, we see an X that's right below some 3/15, which means March 15. And then you continue to see the X's going across. You can see where that shaded column is, and that's 4/15 to 4/25. That's April 25. That's today's date. We're in that grouping, aren't we? And so you see there we have X's for beets. We have X's right now for carrots. We have X's for radishes, and that's why we're talking about them today. Now, when you see that there's zeros, the zeros means that they should be ready for you to pick and eat, otherwise known as ready for you to harvest. But so you see here, you have a whole bunch of X's for these and a whole bunch of O's, and then look at carrots. It goes from X's to zeros, back to X's, back to zeros, and that means you can plant them many times. Let's say you eat this one whole row, you can plant more seeds, grow some more, and have a second crop that you can harvest and eat as the summer goes on. Now this chart says average soil temperature. So you're like, what is that? I thought we generally plant our plants when it gets nice and warm outside. Well, actually, something else that really matters with you are planting seeds is how warm is the soil. And one way you can think about it, and because a lot of people don't really think about what is the soil temperature and how does that affect the seeds that I'm growing. If you think about it, if you put your seeds into your freezer with your ice cream, are the seeds going to grow next time you open it up and you want to get some ice cream out? Are you going to have some carrots that are in there? Probably not. They need to have warm soil for the seeds to actually sprout, bring down their little roots, and to bring up their greenery. So what you see here in this chart for our area, the chart starts with January, and you see here in January on the far left side, temperature of soil is 40 degrees and below. So, you get down closer to that 30 number, and that's when we get ice forming in the puddles. And then you see the chart goes up, which means as we climb that hill of this graph, that the soil temperature is getting warmer. And you see potentially right up there at the peak, you have the number 80. So the soil can actually be 80 degrees if we run our line down directly to the bottom there in July. The soil can get very, very hot. There are thermometers that you can stick into the soil and find out how hot is the soil. Because there are some plants, like for example, tomatoes, that really the tomato's not going to grow. This tomato seed won't sprout, and the plant won't grow even if you put a plant into the soil until the temperature gets up into the 60s. One of the reasons why we're talking about lettuce and radishes and beets and carrots is that all of them grow pretty well when we have the temperatures that we have right now, which is just about 65 degrees. And so it is time to plant them, both temperature outside and with temperature of the soil. We're talking seeds, right? Where do you get your seeds? Well, some of us actually have seeds that we have left over from last year that we didn't plant. And so that's this first row at the top where we use the word seed viability. Viability is whether or not the seed is going to sprout. Can it sprout, or is the seed dead? Is it too old that it won't even sprout? To make sure that if you keep some of the seeds for a length of time, you should store them in a cool, dry place, not in a place where they'll get wet and moldy. And there is actually a test that you can use to find out if some of your old seeds are still good. That first button down at the bottom where I put the article called Good Seed, Bad Seed actually has a test listed, so you can find out how to test some of those seeds to see if they're just too old to plant. That website also talks about how do you create a seed tape. And we'll talk about that in a few more minutes, because some of these seeds are really, really tiny. And so you might want to measure out how many seeds you put into a certain area. You don't want to dump all of the seeds of a packet, like 30, all into something the size of a dime. You want to spread them out so that actually the things like this carrots and the radishes have space so that the roots can get bigger and make a nice size radish for you can eat. Now, some people buy their seeds at the grocery store, at the one of the nurseries where you might buy other plants, and some people buy seeds through a catalog. But that's where you should also look at the little seed packet, and it will tell you information like how long after I plant this seed do I expect to see sprouts. Some of these, like radishes, should sprout within a week. Some other things may take a week or two. These 4 that we put here that we're talking about today are ones that sprout rather quickly. And that's how you can actually have those multiple seeds, plant them, harvest them multiple times in the season. Other things that package will tell you will be things such as how deep to plant them, how far apart, and things like that. So next, what are other important things? You should know, are you planting them in a sunny spot or shade? Do you have water? Will that spot get really, really hot because it's like right around a whole bunch of concrete and the concrete gets hot in the winter? Does that part of your ground form a big puddle so it'd just be water that you'd be planting them in? Or does the water dry up quickly so that the seed can get water, it can sprout, and then wait for the next rainfall or the next time you turn the hose on to get its next drink of water, things like that. Then, like I said before, some people, to help them plant only that certain number of seeds per inch, create their own seed tape. And remember, I put the link address in the past slide that we showed. But yes, some of these you can plant in a pot. Some of these you can just plant straight into a garden bed. That's what direct sow means, is that you're putting them directly in the soil. Now, this little chart tries to summarize all of those, like how deep to put them, like carrots, only 1/4 of an inch versus radishes, an entire inch. How many seeds, like 2 to 3 inches apart versus 4 seeds in an inch. And then how many days do you have to sit there and wait and watch that little greenery grow to the size where you can eat it? Then there was a little rule of thumb that as long as you keep the seeds in a dry place, like we talked about, you can actually keep some of these seeds and they'll still be able to grow for a number of years afterwards. And then here are some of those other reports where you can find some answers to some of your questions.
Well, thank you, Jan. That was a really excellent presentation, really thorough overview of kind of some of these early crops that we can get in our garden if we're itching to start soon.
There's one question, and it was, are Brussels sprouts okay to be planted in pots?
This is Becky, and I had a chance to look it up while you were talking.
Oh, good.
If you don't have an answer on hand.
No, I've never tried to grow them, but I know they grow in this very, very tall thing.
Okay, so Brussels sprouts can grow in containers, but you just have to be sure the container is large enough. It needs to be at least 12 inches tall to allow enough soil for the roots to establish deeply enough. And it needs to have a diameter of 12 to 14 inches to allow enough space for the plant.
Okay, I do know that there's another document that you can read that says what is the minimum size pot for different types of vegetables.
So Brussels sprouts in the ground can also be rather unwieldy. I imagine in a pot, it might not get as big. So you might be on the lookout for that as well.
Jan, thank you so much. That's great information. Our next presenter is Randy Weidman, and Randy's going to talk about, and I appreciate that he worked in our little marketing ploy here, make it seed time, not screen time. But ways to engage kids in gardening. This can be a really fun hands-on activity for the whole family. And Randy, I'm really excited to hear what you have to say. So I'll turn it over to you.
So the first thing I'll mention here is I used the letter CMG, and you saw the term Certified Master Gardener. That just means that we have been through a 3-year program of training and volunteer time and have completed that and are continuing on. So we'll talk about kids in the garden, and I'll start with some of the general topics of things that kids will learn, and we'll be happy to entertain questions on that and everything else. So kids, of course, can apply and improve their understanding of science, math, reading, and writing skills. And here, this kid is starting out early, learning the importance of watering plants, and we should tell our kids the importance not only of water, but of sunlight and air. That is CO2 and oxygen, and the nutrients in the ground that the plants need. The older kids can help with planning. Of course, the younger kids can help too, but the older kids are probably going to be more interested in helping with planning than the younger ones. That can include sketches and determining, for example, so compatibility of plants. Some plants are good close together, better than others. Plotting out where they're going to put the plants, where they're going to have the rows, and of course, before they do any of that, seed counting, making sure that they have enough seeds and adding to them if necessary. The younger ones might be helpful with seed counting too. The older kids are better with the preparations, as I said earlier, and the younger kids may have more fun outside than inside. In this photo here, the kids, the families, the teachers are putting lines in the soil for rows. But another possibility in this picture is a term that's called square foot gardening, which is another method that involves a lot of learning and compatibility of plants. And it is possible to have a lot of plants in a small amount of space. The younger kids especially enjoy digging and playing in the dirt. And that's of course an important aspect. But as we heard from Jan earlier, it's important to have the seeds close enough, not too close together, and of course not too deep. General rule of thumb is that the seeds should be about the depth of the length of the seed, and not much more. But that's only a general rule of thumb. It's really important to read those seed packets to get that right. And then likewise, we don't want the younger kids to bury the transplants too far. It can, if it's done right, if they're not too close together and not too deep, it's all good. Of course, not too shallow either. So we talked about watering on that first slide. Watering, of course, is important, but we want to get it right. Just like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, we don't want too much water. We don't want too little water. We want it just right. Kids and can also look for abnormalities which are probably diseases on the plants. What looks wrong? What looks different between different plants? And are there any bugs? Some of the bugs are beneficial, like some of the spiders, for example, actually eat the bad bugs that eat on the plants. But we want to make sure that, especially if there are a lot of tiny bugs on the underside of a leaf, that we find that. And sometimes the younger kids have it easier finding those little bugs. Pruning is another aspect. Pulling off the dead stems off of tomatoes is something that can easily be done by any age, but of course care should be taken when using pruners or scissors or knives, and age appropriate, and parents know, of course, whether it's appropriate for their kids to be doing that. But there are lots of things that the kids can do to help with the maintenance in the garden. So harvesting perhaps is the best time, and I certainly think so anyway. Many children, and I've observed this with my two kids, will eat just about everything. Actually, I think everything that we've planted in our gardens. And it's a great way for kids to want to eat, or to actually have a healthier diet, is if there's a home garden, a home vegetable garden specifically. And I would especially recommend tomatoes, cherry tomatoes, that is, and sweet peas, from my experience anyway with my kids. So in summary, we talked about the planning and the early stages of gardening. We talked about the digging and the planting and watering and maintenance, looking for diseases and bugs. We talked about the harvesting. Be safe and have fun. And I will ask if there are any questions.
So Randy, there's one question which I think you answered part way, which was, what are some things you've grown that kids have really enjoyed? What didn't they like as much?
So I'm the only thing, as I think about it, the only one thing that I think my kids didn't like so much was the asparagus. But and that's a perennial, and it takes 2 or 3 years before it's actually producing a good harvest. But everything else that we planted, which have been many different kinds of vegetables, they have enjoyed, especially the sweet peas and the cherry tomatoes. The cherry tomatoes more than the big ones. Especially in this area, the bugs and the birds and the squirrels tend to get to the bigger tomatoes, but the cherry tomatoes grow so readily and so quickly that we get them more quickly than the animals. The lettuces and cabbages, even my kids were more willing to try them and enjoy them than when we bought them at the grocery store or in restaurants. The The peppers, well, if they're not too spicy, my kids have enjoyed them. So that's a second example, as my daughter especially doesn't like the spicy peppers, but everything else has been good with the kids.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you,
you all.
Randy. That was a fabulous presentation, and appreciate the anecdotes from your own family's garden. It sounds like you guys have a lot of really happy memories growing a lot of fun things together. So that's what it's all about. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Our final presenter tonight is Clara Bilgan, who will share some sensory elements that you can consider incorporating into your garden. So of course you can taste the produce you grow, which Randy just covered, but thinking of other sensory elements like smell and touch, hearing and sight are also great ways to engage and enhance everyone's enjoyment of the garden. So Clara, over to you.
My presentation is really following in the steps of Randy. I have two boys. They are now pre-teens, but 7 years ago, when they were 5 and 6, we started gardening together. And knowing my kids, I knew that in order to get them involved, we have to include 3 elements in the experience. First of all, my kids are very competitive, so I knew that the boys have to be competing against each other. And they would usually compete about who is going to produce a bigger plant, who would get more bucks. Whatever it was, I knew that our experience would have to have a competitive element. Second, as Jan said, or Randy, kids love digging, and they love digging because it is a way of sanctioning them to be dirty, to be mischievous. We basically even encourage them to do so. So something that has not been allowed before is now allowed, and it's even encouraged. It's great for them. And the third element is the variation. Kids love to experiment, to discover new things, and varieties of things such as methods, crops, outcomes, help them to learn through this experimentation. So these experiences have to be memorable. I remember getting interested in gardening as a small girl when my grandmother taught me how to catch slugs by putting bowls of beer in the ground. And I found this to be totally fascinating, kind of putting these bowls with the smelly beer and then catching the slugs and the slugs trying to swim. I thought this was the most amazing experiment ever. At this time, there was no fertilizer, so my grandmother also used to put all kinds of things under her tomatoes. She would always bury something. And again, this was the funniest part for me. We would find an egg, we would find old bird, and we would bury it under the tomatoes. So when I started doing gardening with my kids, I knew that I have to involve and include something that would be unusual, that would be mischievous, that would be kind of interesting for them. So we created several raised beds in our garden. One of them is kind of shown here on the screen. It was 12 feet long by 4 by 10 inches deep. And we wanted to have tomatoes and we wanted to have cucumbers. So for each of the kids, we dug 3 holes for the tomato plants. And to create variation, we decided to put 3 different things in the holes. In the first hole, we put an egg. In the second hole, we wanted to put a fish, but we decided to go with a fish can, just not to bring all the neighborhood dogs with the fish smell. And in the third one, we put chalk. Now, of course, these were products that were supposed to give the tomato calcium and to prevent bottom rot on the tomato. But the interesting thing was for them that, okay, they put these things, they buried them, they're excited about it. And then they were able to compare how their tomatoes grew, whether the egg was better in terms of being a fertilizer or the fish or the chalk. The other experiment that we created this first year was to sow cucumbers, but to sow them in a different way. Already one of the presenters mentioned the different tapes, the seed tape. So kids can make their own seed tape, or they can buy a seed tape. The parents can buy a seed tape, but it's very fun just to spread the seed tape, put some soil on top and be done with it. We also tried with toilet paper. We spread the toilet paper, we put the seeds at an equal distance, and then we sprayed a little bit of water over it. And our third row was just by simply putting by hand the old traditional way the different seeds. So doing this was again a way of experimenting because we wanted to see which of the 3 rows of cucumbers is going to germinate first. And interestingly, we found out that the one that was done in the toilet paper way was the one that germinated first. So after we planted this, the kids were going and measuring their tomatoes almost every single tomato seedlings almost every single week. And it was very fun. So this was our experiment with kids. Now, if I am to create an experiment for kids and vegetables and sensory elements, and they are, let's say, at a bigger age, let's say they are middle schoolers, I would probably go first and see what classifications of vegetables are out there. And the funniest for them would be the classification of vegetables by edible parts. So root vegetables, tubers, bulbs, stem, leaf, flowers, fruit, mature, and seed. And possibly I would have an experiment where we would have rows of all these 9 types of vegetables and see how, in what different ways they develop and what kind of different things happen to them in the ground and outside of the ground. But if you do not have, the time and don't want to put an effort to create an experiment of 9 types of vegetables, possibly the best way to do with kids is to choose at least 2, one climber and one creeper, and observe how they grow differently, how they develop differently, how insects go for different parts of the plant, and so on. Or another way to do this experiment would be just to plant the vegetables that the family loves most. And for the last several years, that's what we have been doing. And I would now cover the 4 vegetables that we use to plant and how the sensory elements, impact kids for these 4 vegetables. So the first one is tomatoes. And I mean, the tomatoes are the most popular vegetable. And they're also, I think, most popular in terms of having them in kids' gardens. And there are several reasons for that. First, they're very easy to grow. Usually you would have a successful outcome at the end of the season. For my kids, it was important that they were easy to measure. So you can go every week in the garden and see how much they have grown. You can compare easily between different tomatoes in my garden, in your garden. They have a very interesting texture. They are fuzzy and hairy, as kids would say, because of the trichomes on their stems. And it is a good opportunity to explain what the role of these trichomes is, that they help plants to resist cold, drought, ultraviolet light, and that they are a great protection, they offer great protection for the plant. And also, I would usually show my kids how, that these trichomes can be transformed into roots, and you can plant your tomato really deep in the soil. And this hairy part would become actually extended root system. The other thing that I like is that, and kids really like, is the very strong and spicy odor of the tomato, which is very distinct. It is something that really reminds you of spring. Some people hate it, some people really like it. I tend to like it, my kids also like it. And it's an odor that is there to provide defense for the plant against pests and diseases. This is another thing that can be taught to kids. In terms of tomato and tomato leaves, my kids and I were also very much involved at looking at the leaves and kind of discussing how the temperature affects when they open and when they start to shrivel and close. So in terms of tomato, this would be the first thing I would always put in my garden for kids. The second one, which is not a vegetable, technically it is a fruit, but I mean, we all know that we would have it in our vegetable garden, would be, of course, cucumbers. And cucumbers are great because they would be our creeper. Technically a creeper, but grows like a climber. So it's perfect for kids to see how the tendrils attach themselves to the trellis and to be able to build a trellis. I tried to build the trellis with my kids. It was not very stable, but they had fun doing that. And then we would discuss, we would look at the cucumbers and look at the texture. Why are cucumbers smooth or why they are bumpy? We would discuss that their skin is really very hard and it's not easy for pests to penetrate the skin. But when they cannot penetrate the skin, the bugs actually go for the vine. And we had a situation actually year after year in which cucumber beetles would destroy our plants, and the bacterial wilt would really make them collapse very much 1 month into their growth. And this was interesting because for the first time, kids would see that you may not always have a success. You may have a plant that shrivels, dries up, and dies. And they were very emotionally impacted by that. But I said, well, that's what happens. They just pull out the vines and put something else there, and be very careful that these cucumber beetles don't go to our new crop. And then in terms of cucumbers, we would speak about their smell, how their smell and texture have really some kind of creative properties. So the smell of the cucumber makes people relax. The cucumber itself is always cooler. So if you want to cool your hands or your face, you can put cucumber peel or cucumber slices on yourself, and it would have a it would have a cooling effect. And it would also extract water on a swollen area. One great thing I remember from my childhood during the weekends would be for all the ladies in the family, in the extended family, my aunts, my grandparents, my friends getting together and putting cucumber masks on our face. And this was kind of a term of passage, becoming a young lady once you're accepted in the group of ladies and they splash cucumber on your face. And this is something that you don't forget. Yes, you have a good association with cucumbers that, you become a young lady, you're more beautiful, and you have the cooling effect of the mask. So sensory, in terms of sensory affectation, the cucumber will be also a great thing to have for kids. The third thing that we tend to grow is actually third and fourth would be sugar snap peas and snow peas. And I love these as well as radishes because these are early crops. Yes, all of these crops would germinate. You can put the seeds early, sometimes in February, more likely March, but you would have them germinate in March and April. And this is the moment that you can really get the kids in the garden because they're exhausted from being inside. They want to be outside, but it is not so warm. Their friends are not in the playground. So they would give you more attention than they would give you at any other month of the year. And that's an advantage. I would always have success bringing my kids in the garden and sometime in March and April, but not later on when the pool is open. And in terms of snap peas and snow peas, this is something that you can directly eat from the vine. And this would provide the two different species of legumes would provide the kids with the basis of comparison. Yes, two legume species, but one is really flat and kind of not filled inside, while the other is really roundish and they are round pods inside the shell. You can demonstrate how one is flexible and bendy, and the other one is more crisp. And then with this type of crops, another experiment that is great with kids is to do the sowing, the direct sowing, and to have two types of direct sowing. One in which you actually pre-soak the seeds in water for about 6 to 8 hours, and then see how much faster they would germinate, versus those seeds that you would not pre-soak and they would take a little bit longer, 3-4 days to germinate. So sugar peas, snap peas, great in terms of texture. It's also a vine. My kids would go and kind of basically adjust the hooks of the tendrils to the vine because they would say, oh, it's not really properly attached to the trellis. So I find it very funny how every day they would go and work on the tendrils and attach them to the trellis. Something that they found to be very fun to do. And the final veggie that we really love to grow traditionally are radishes. And this is a great opportunity. This plant gives kids a great opportunity to really go down into the dirt and to dig in, which they totally love to do, especially when they are younger. It is also a spring crop. It grows best in cool weather. So we have already put ours, and we have been able even to dig out some of them. It is very fast crop, and kids are so impatient. So having something that would come from germination to harvest in 3 to 6 weeks is a great experience. They see the fruit of their labor very fast. And then for this one, we would usually speak about how temperature and soil pressure affects the radishes themselves. The longer you leave the radishes in the soil, the more bitter they become and the more kind of squishy and vacuous they would become inside. So in terms of this crop, my lesson would be everything has to be picked on time. If you leave those radishes there for a long time, you would think you would get a better product, better a veggie, but it would not be the case. It would be really very squishy and not nice. So I would make them to squish and to touch those radishes. Now, final caveat. The moment you think you got it with kids, they move on. Now, my kids are preteens, and there is no way for me to have them in the garden with me, kind of working on the veggie patches. This is not cool. They are embarrassed that their parents may, that their friends may see them with their mom in the garden, so they would not do it. But they are now interested in fruits and especially brambles. So I found it quite interesting that now they would join me occasionally when planting raspberries and blackberries. And now our variation would be of having different raspberry bushes, having golden ones, having black ones, having red ones, and seeing which ones we would like the most in terms of taste. Also, at this age of 13 and 14, I see that they are more also into trees. Kind of, they are taller now and they don't want to dig into the dirt anymore. They want to have something of bigger stature. And especially when I give them the loppers and tell them, okay, we are pruning now. Can you prune this part of the tree versus that? This gives them the freedom and the responsibility that they desire at this moment. So I feel that, at this stage, if I want to do gardening, I would do it more with the brambles and the orchard, and the small orchard that we have, rather than with the vegetables and the root crop that we have in our garden. So just final caveat, the moment you think you know how to engage your kids, the post is moving and you have to move with them.
Well, thank you, Clara. That was an amazing presentation. And what I really liked about your presentation and Randy's was that it's very personal. It's from, your own experience gardening with your family. And, like you said, those interests may change over the years, but you're both doing work that I'm sure your kids will grow gardens with their families based on, their upbringing with you guys. So Liz, I think I saw some questions pop into the chat. Do we have any questions specifically for Clara?
Yes, there are several questions. The first one from Evie is, how long does it take for an avocado tree to grow?
Evie, I can say from my own experience, I have two methods, one more successful than another. But if you want to try to start an avocado seed, like our presenter said, this area, they don't live outside all winter. But if you have an avocado and you take the pit, you can stick 3 toothpicks in it and suspend it like kind of in the middle of the avocado pit, and then put it in a glass of water. And it's going to take some time. So keep the water in there. Make sure that the bottom of the avocado pit, the kind of wider part of it, because they're oval shaped, is in the water. And just be patient. And eventually you'll start to see that big seed split in half and a shoot will come out of the top and it'll start to develop roots. This has taken, weeks to months for me. And then you can put it in a pot and just see what happens. Mine I take outside in the summer, like Jan was saying, and then drag them back in the winter. So right now mine are short. They're like, 2 or 3 feet tall. So I can do that, but eventually they're going to get too big. The other method that I have, and I can't really advise on how to do this because it's totally accidental, but mine sprouted in my compost because it was warm enough over the winter that the seeds didn't die. And so in the spring, we're like, what are these things coming up in our garden? And they're a bunch of avocado trees. So 2 methods, one you leave to chance and one you try yourself. But good luck.
And Clara, Becky wanted to know which methods won in your planting experiments.
So I think that the fish actually won. In terms of putting an egg, putting some canned fish, or putting a little bit of chalk, the fish would usually be the one to produce a bigger plant.
What about the
go ahead.
cucumbers, though, with your methods of planting the cucumber seeds? I mean, you left us hanging.
Yes, it would be the toilet paper. The tape, the seed tape that we bought was not doing very fine. It would be the toilet paper, which we would find all around the neighborhood, not only around our yard, but so I wouldn't recommend it really. But it's fun. The kids just love it as part of the experience.
Oh, absolutely.
And it works well. Works well. But it is these things that they would remember. Just to share something else, when I was in high school, they were sending us to help a farmer near the school with his potatoes. So we had to collect Colorado beetles. The whole group of 20 students would go there to collect Colorado beetles. I still remember this experience, how everybody was crazily collecting because our grade of A, B, or C was based on how many beetles we would collect. And I don't remember anything about potatoes, but now any moment I see a beetle, I'm like, wait, is this a Colorado beetle? And are the eggs orangey? So such kind of experiences, they stay with kids. And they can put the seed there for them to become future master gardeners, something that is really unusual, out of the ordinary. Like,
And mine love to pick the cabbage worms off the plants.
yeah. And when they compete and see who would collect more, it's great for them and get a prize for collecting the most. That's what kids like.
The next question that we have is, how tall of a trellis did you use for the cucumbers?
Oh, I try to have a really tall one, but you have to kind of bend it or tilt it, but it can be up to 6 feet. One of those kind of panels that you can get from Home Depot, building panels.
Okay, I have 2 more quick questions. One is, are cucumbers bothered by squash vine borers?
Mine were not.
Okay, and the last question is, how big can radishes get?
I have found that one thing that defines how big they can get is nutrition, but also the compaction of the soil. We have a very clay soil in this part of the country. At least in my garden, it's really very heavy clay, and they cannot get very big. They are really small. The more I aerate the soil and put something else there, like perlite or something like this, the bigger they become. It's really how much pressure there is there on the.
And then I had one final question kind of for everybody. But did you ever find that, like, for direct sowing seeds, were there seeds that were just too hard for kids to work with, or were there some that were easier for them to work with, or which were the most fun, did you find, for the kids to plant and watch grow?
Especially with the younger kids, the tiny seeds, like lettuce, for example, are more difficult to plant. The bigger seeds are probably the most fun, and there are some colorful seeds as well. But what really matters is what comes up and what we harvest.
I would second that. My kids love the peas because it is roundish, it's small balls. It is really kind of 1/4 of an inch sometimes. It's easy. It's gentle on the hands. So that's their favorite thing to sow.
Well, thank you all so much for your great presentations tonight. I think it's given us all a lot to think about and a lot of energy going into our gardening. I know as I was listening to all of you speak, I was like, gosh, I'm just a big kid. Like all of this is really interesting to me too. I love the experiments and the kind of fun ideas you all shared tonight. So thank you very much to our presenters, Jan, Randy, Clara, you guys did a fabulous job. And Becky, of course, for the jumping worm. So we are going to kind of move through some updates here to wrap up the meeting tonight before we close. And this first one, I wanted to share some information about keeping a garden journal. This is something that we're going to return to during all of our Tuesday night presentations. So if you're interested in starting a garden journal, Evie, this might be great for you as you're taking notes on those cucumbers and avocado trees and things that you're planting. You can kind of keep notes about tasks you have to do, what's working, what's not, what bugs you're seeing. It's just a great way to kind of keep an eye on what you're seeing throughout the year. In the chat, you'll see a link to a great template that we found and we thought was really useful. And so, if that's something you want to play around with, I encourage you to test it out yourself. And then we'll kind of touch on this at every clinic, but then at the end of the year, we're going to reflect a little bit on our garden journals, use that to see what worked, what didn't, and maybe what we want to do the same or do differently into the next planting season. This is a little bit more kind of some of the things that you can do in that template. You can have a plant inventory, you can schedule when you need to plant your seeds, things like that. So it's a really useful tool that we kind of nerded out about this week. So to register for these sessions, find additional resources, including articles, weed profiles, and more, please visit fairfaxgardening.org. There's a ton of information there, as well as our monthly calendar that will cover future topics. So we've been hosting these plant clinics since the summer of 2020, when we all went virtual. We have recorded all of these and they're available on our Fairfax County YouTube site. So if you search YouTube for VCE/Fairfax County or -Fairfax County, I'm sorry, you'll be able to find the archive of these videos, and we cover tons of topics. So there's a lot of information out there for you. And then we have lots of resources. We're a very educational organization, as you can tell. On the Virginia Cooperative Extension website, that site is listed here, resources.ext.vt.edu. You can find lots more publications that are through our land grant universities. So you can access those there. So finally, thank you for attending tonight. Thank you for sticking with us. I know this is a long program, but so much great information.